This is what the Olympic gold medalist Carl Hester has to say on Team NAF.
My job in all of this, of course, is to be able to say to the experts, you know, this is what I feel the horse is doing, this is what I would like it to look like, what do you suggest? And I'm lucky to be able to have somebody that I can ask those questions to, because of course they are the experts, they're the people that I have to put my trust in, and the horses. You know, we want to ride on teams, we have to think of safe sport, we know that NAF leads the way in that. I have this really wonderful relationship that I feel is trustworthy, I can ask what I like, and at the end of the day it's how our horses look. And I mean, I think we could safely say that, you know, when you look at the type of horses we have and the covering of muscle and condition that they're in, that things are really working well for us.
Welcome to the App Ratings Eventing podcast and a cup of tea show very kindly supported by NAF. Well, today's show, listeners, is an International Women's Day special. And the guest on the show is a lady who has paved the way within her career. She has been a top-level rider. She is one of the only, if not the only, women to ever design a top-level championship cross-country course. She was the course designer for the London Olympic Games in 2012. She is as well an upper-level event horse owner because she owns a horse who finished on the individual and team podium at the World Championships in Protoni last year. Basically, this conversation could go in so many different directions, listeners. I'm absolutely delighted to welcome to the show Sue Benson.
Hi, everybody.
Look, there are so many different directions, as I say, that we could take this conversation because your career at the top level of the sport has had so many different avenues and different ways. So we're going to cover a few of them on the show. But first of all, let's start with the event horse ownership, because Falco, who is ridden by New Zealand's Team Price, took the individual bronze and team bronze at the World Championships in Protoni last year. How did you come about to own Falco? Tell us a little bit about him.
So Falco came to me as a 5-year-old in a part exchange. So I bought a fairly ordinary horse to just sort of hack about and do a bit of dressage on, and that didn't work out. He didn't actually appear to be quite what I thought I'd bought, and I had bought him from a dealer. So I took him back and said, I don't want this horse, and I'll take anything else you've got in exchange, and I'll wait until, I'll take a 3-year-old. I'll do anything, but I don't want this horse. So there was a bit of ill feeling because dealers hate taking horses back. But anyway, he took it back, and I went away and came back about 3 weeks later and looked at a few 3-year-olds, which weren't really my sort. And then he said, well, while you're here, do you know anyone with a bit more money? Because I've got a lovely horse around the back, which I want to sell, but he's expensive. So I said, oh, yeah, I think I do know a junior or something that's got lots of money and probably not so much sense. But anyway, he took me around the back, and there was Falco. And he trotted him up for me. And I mean, I can honestly say I have never, very early on in my career, I fell in love with a horse very early on. But apart from that, I've never fallen in love with a horse the way I just had to have him, It was like, no, I'm not telling anyone else about him. So then there was a bit of an argy-bargy about the price of him. And I went home and told my husband, and he said, well, sell some assets, do something, buy him. If you want him, buy him. So my mum had died couple of years before that, and I had got a bit of investment. So the investments were liquidated, and I bought him just on the whim of wanting him, not because I thought he was going to be an amazing horse. He moved beautifully, had presence. He just was a lovely pattern of a horse. So, and I took him home, and I did a lot of dressage with him as a 6-year-old. And came home with quite a lot of red rosettes, but he got quite naughty. And the naughtier he got, the more he started to alarm me, because, by then I was in my 60s. And so I thought, no, I don't want a horse that spins on the road and rears and starts being naughty. And he had such a big jump anyway. So he started with David Dole, did just a couple of weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks with David Dole. And then I sort of shifted him over to Jesse Campbell for all sorts of reasons. And of course, Jesse was far too big for him, but he did actually do his first 3 pre-novices as a 6-year-old. And then we all decided that Jess was clearly far too big for him. And Jesse said, really ask Tim. So Tim lived quite locally. And I thought, yeah, he's only up the road. I'll let Tim have a sit on him. And the rest is history, really, because he never looked like he was going to be a world championship horse. At the time, he was quite sort of small and fat, and he had lovely movement and a big jump. But I think Tim just thought, well, we'll give it a go. He's quite fun, and he used to say, "What a fun horse to ride." For a lot of years, he said, "Falco's such fun," and then suddenly he became a proper horse. He became a really staggeringly good horse. And he was naughty at times. Tim would say he'd had a difficult passage with him at times, but the potential was always there. And I've never lost, between us, we've just never lost faith in something a bit special there.
The kind of the moment of falling in love with a horse, and the kind of the journey that they take you on, because actually that was a horse for you. That was sort of one for you to keep at home.
Definitely.
And actually, I mean, he's gone on and on and on, and his career has progressed. So was that a dream that actually, I mean, it feels like you kind of found yourself on that journey as such.
Absolutely. I never had any intention of owning top class horses. I only ever wanted to own nice little novices that, it was quite nice. Once I stopped competing myself, I quite enjoyed other people competing my horses, but they were usually quite ordinary horses, and, it wasn't very pressurized. I can't tell you how nervous I get now. It's a lot of the fun is in watching the training. The actual big competitions are quite stressful for me.
I was going to say, how different and how difficult is it? Because you've been there, you've done it, you've seen the sport from different angles, you've had courses that you've set that people have been and jumped, you've jumped them yourself, and all of a sudden, you're not in charge of setting the course, you're not in charge of jumping it, it is your horse in somebody else's hands. That must be a very different feeling.
It's that loss of control, which, for someone who's ridden at the top level, designed at the top level, and then suddenly to own something which you have no control of how it's going to go at all. That's the nerve-wracking bit. He goes through those starting flags. And for someone who, I suppose, maybe I'm a control freak, not a very serious one, but, it was always nice to be in control of everything. I ran my yard, I rode my horses, I trained them, I made all the big decisions. And suddenly I find myself not just at the competitions, but year in and year out, not really making the decisions, not really knowing what's going on from 1 week to the next, because obviously as an owner, you're particularly in a setup like Tim and Janelle have, you don't get in their way. They're doing a job, and they're doing a very, very good job. So you just take a back seat. And that's been almost the hardest, is to let go of him. Let go of everything and just say, I'm not interfering. When I'm dying to interfere, I can tell you sometimes.
What's it like owning a horse with Tim? Because he seems unbelievably relaxed, laid back, but him and Janelle have pretty different styles in terms of the way they run their yard, their business. So what's that like as an owner?
It's been a learning curve, but he's always been delightful in every way, and he's been so understanding about how difficult it's been for me, so I think he's very aware that it's been hard to let the horse go, but he's rewarded me a 1,000 times over, and there's never been we never disagreed about any of his training plans, his program. We work together, and I honestly, I can't imagine having a horse for anyone else.
Now, I can actually remember, you sort of mentioned on the kind of the few blips that you had along the way. And I actually remember one of the first times seeing Falco in the flesh was actually in an Event Rider Masters in Shardy in 2019. He'd stepped up to the level very long, actually. I think he'd done one 4-star short and in Le Moulin, and then it was his next sort of run, and it was right at the end of the course. And he was on track to be on the podium, if not take the win, ultimately.
I know.
And there was a really, I think, if memory serves me correctly, cheeky run out late on. But
it was after a bank, a fence on top of a sort of bump, and then he had to turn left to a triple brush. I think it was a double of triple brushes, and he got the first one and ducked out at the second. Yeah. 2 from home or 1 from home. Yeah.
I guess the reason I picked that as an example is there's been moments, and we're going to talk about the moments that it's all come together in a second, but he has been the prime candidate of actually having so much talent, so much promise. One of the best riders, if not the best rider in the world, sat on top of him, and just it not all quite coming together. How frustrating has that been? But also, has it actually played into his favour down the line, in so much as now we're looking at a horse whereby he's very established at that top level, and hopefully there is a lot more to come over the next couple of years?
Has it played into his hands? I think it meant that we had to keep going back, re-establishing rather than cracking on, the next. There were the blips. So you then had to sort of say, okay, well, maybe isn't ready for whatever, and we have to, reapproach. But he really never made the same mistake twice. Every time he made a mistake, it was genuinely for a different reason. And mostly it was because he overjumped into a combination, or he jumped too high over a ditch and missed and therefore had a bad distance to the last part of a coffin, or those sort of things. Always almost his ability. He jumped himself into trouble, and then he was very quick, and so it was probably it did play into his hands, as you say, because we didn't rush him. We couldn't, because he kept losing qualifications for a start.
It all came together, it feels like, 2021, when he went brilliantly well at Mill Street. He won the 4-star long there. Then he went for a top 10 finish at Aachen. Per of that year, I think he showed his excellence in all 3 phases. I mean, a 22.1 in the dressage. He picked up, the only penalty he added was a second over the time in the jumping, which I think was probably because he spent so much time in the air, giving everything so much space that it ran the clock down slightly. Yeah. How was Poe as an owner? Because winning a 5-star is a pretty big deal.
I never set out to win a 5-star. When he went to Poe, we didn't even know if he was a 5-star horse. It was completely, we'll just put him out there and see what's going to happen. So I never expect him to win. I was always hopeful that he would, get in the front line, maybe top 6 or 8 or something, because you could see he had the talent and he'd had a good year, having, as you say, having won Mill Street. But then when he won it, it was just like, this horse owes me nothing. Most people never get more than 1 5-star win out of their horse. Obviously there's the odd one that does, but mostly this is it. He's done everything he has to do for me. And then, of course, what I hadn't really anticipated was getting onto the teams for the World Championship. So then it gets bigger in a way, although Pretoni was in theory only 4-star. I think the whole feel of the thing was bigger because it was team. So yes, it just seems to get bigger and bigger. I thought Poe would be, the highlight of my owner's career, but seems I've got to press on a bit longer.
I was going to say, Sue, watch this space, because who knows what the next 2 years could bring. What about Pretoni? Because New Zealand went with a pretty young team. There was World Championships always bring that extra bit of pressure in terms of Olympic qualification as well. And so what was the whole feeling like within the team camp in the build-up to Protoni?
The great thing about working with the New Zealanders is they're always so positive. They're always competitive. They always seem to believe in themselves. Every time they go out on something like that, they plan to win. And so you just get swept along in the sort of positiveness of it. And no one was negative about Protoni. They all felt that they could pull something out of the bag. And even when he was so Falco was 14th after the dressage and Tim was disappointed, but there was so much still to play for. You never get that feeling they're defeated. And it was absolutely amazing. But I mean, that bronze coming out of the blue, really, because it all came down to the show jumping. And in fact, Falco moved up to third with the last horse having the last fence down.
Yes, and
like fourth.
I was going to say, and he was equal with Ros Cantor as well, wasn't he? But Tim had been closer to the optimum time cross country and all that sort of thing. I know it's tough.
It's tough.
Going into the show jumping, by the time that Tim jumped, you could tell that it was a tough track. There were plenty of poles. There was that real roller coaster in terms of the team performances of the 1 minute. The US were leading, the next minute Germany were leading, then Britain were. I mean, it was just up, down. The maths were going crazy.
That was all over my head. I had no idea that was going on.
You were probably a lot less stressed. Well, I was going to say less stressed than the rest of us. Probably not, actually. But Falco is known for being an exceptional jumper on the final day. I mean, his technique is incredible. Listeners, if you haven't watched him show jump, go and next time he's at an event, go and watch him because it's just extraordinary. I think he's had 2 rails in an international career that's over 20 competitions. He's just magic. Does that add to the pressure on a final day like that? Because he's perfectly capable of jumping a clear round.
I think it adds to to my pressure, how I feel. But I think that Tim has such confidence that I would imagine. I mean, I don't know how Tim feels about going in on a horse like him. He must know that everyone expects him to jump clear, but equally he probably does himself expect to jump clear on him. So I find the pressure terrible. I always say sooner or later he's got to have a fence because he's a horse, and they aren't, you can't program them that much. So I always think, well, I just hope it's not today. Well, I certainly did in Protoni. It was not a day for him to have a fence down. But once he'd jumped the first 3 or 4 fences, I kind of thought, well, he's on this. He's going to go clear. It was the time that I got nervous about because the clock was ticking away. And Tim always seems to take his time, and it was ticking away. And I mean, I think he was 1 second inside the time in the end.
He's so good with the clock, though. He probably knows exactly where he's meant to be. It just adds to the pressure of everybody else watching at home. What's the plan now with Falco? Because we've got start of 2023 is just ahead of us. We've got Paris Olympics next year. There's not a championship for the New Zealand team this year in terms of a major championship. So what will be the plan for him over the next sort of 12, 18 months or so?
So it's been an interesting conversation, and we have had quite a few, sort of little chats and then put the thing away for a bit and think and then have another chat. And I think Tim and I have agreed that this is not a year to push him to do certainly not to do 2 5-stars. And in a way, with Protoni behind him, why push him to produce all the goods again in the spring? So we decided no 5-star in the spring. Le Moulin is sort of there, but Tim just didn't feel it was necessary to run him in Le Moulin, and he didn't feel that would bring him on in any way. So we're looking at the moment at a quiet spring. He's going to go to Mill Street for the Nations Cup probably, which is 4-star short, and then he's going to Aachen again because he's an Aachen horse, really. I mean, he should have won it once of the twice he's been. The first time he had one of his 2 fences down in the show jumping, which cost him a podium place. And then last year, as probably people can remember, he got stuck on top of a fence. I mean, literally, no one to this day will know what went through his mind as he took off, but he took off and sort of stopped in the middle of the fence, and Tim leapt off him, and therefore, to extricate him, and that was the end. So Aachen is a big one for Tim. He says, "I'm going to nail this," and then really we'll just take it from there. But Maryland is a nice idea, but it's a bit out of touch really. It's a long old journey, and what else? And so he may end up going to Poe again.
Watch this space before the end of the year. I think you're right, isn't it? It's one of those that actually it feels like you and I were just chatting before we started recording this. You kind of look at next summer and work backwards and go, okay, what do we need to do? Actually, we want to get him there in the best possible form. He's got to run to be in the best possible form, but also we don't need to take any unnecessary risk.
He's 13 or 14 now, and so it seems like miles on the clock is something you have to be aware of. And because of the way he goes, the way he jumps, we've always tried to protect him from a lot of hard ground, that sort of thing, because he jumps so high over everything. So there's a lot of protecting him physically as well. And if you have an Olympic type horse, as you say, work backwards from the Olympics. And I mean, Tim's got an amazing string of horses at the moment, so I'm not taking anything for granted. Because Falco's still got to come out as the right one for the competition, and of course at the moment it's the 2 show jumping rounds that play into his hands as much as anything. But he is also, he can improve on the flat still. And the cross country, as you say, has become so established. Why wouldn't you?
Why wouldn't you? The Olympics have been a massive part of your career as well, because back in 2012, London, and the build up to London really is the biggest part of it. But you were tasked with the charge of designing the cross-country course for the London Olympic Games, a home Olympics. Ultimately, that is, I think, one of the highest accolades as a course designer that you could probably look for. What was that, I think, first of all, what was it that got you into course design after your riding career as such? Because the build up to London is something I'm really interested in terms of exploring a little bit further, because that is huge pressure. And I'm sure looking back, actually, it feels like a bit of a whirlwind, even though it was over a number of years.
Yeah, so I got into design because as my own career sort of slowly unwound, as it were, and I realised that, probably the best was over, and I didn't want to give up. I didn't want to lose the sport. I didn't want to lose the contacts. I really wanted to be involved. I certainly didn't want to be a dressage judge. So designing had always interested me. I'm quite a visual person anyway. And as a journalist, which probably very few people know, but I used to write for Eventing magazine on a monthly basis. And many a time I was asked to go and look at courses and write about them before. So I'd go to badminton and do the preview for badminton, Burley, Gatcombe, all those sort of things. So I was then found myself walking these courses with the designers. And I just became more and more fascinated in, there was Hugh Thomas, there was Mark Phillips, there was Mike Tucker. They were all fascinating people to walk the courses with. And I suddenly realized that this was actually a really difficult task, but one that would be quite interesting to do. And so I just became very interested in, why did you do this? Why do you build it like that? And so it went on. And then I happened to mention to Mike Tucker that I would quite like to design something. And he just said, well, Bicton are looking for a designer. I'll put your name forward. And that was how it started. And I went to Bicton, a really, really novice designer. And in those days, you didn't need to have the qualifications you've got now. And I was tasked with doing the novice, the intermediate and the advanced course, just like that, as my first ever event. So it was quite a steep learning curve. I'll say that. And it wasn't always as successful as it should have been. I made my mistakes just like you would do if you were riding. You make mistakes and you learn from your mistakes. But I really, really wanted to be good at it. So I took a lot of trouble to go. And then I would ring up. Quite often I rang up Hugh and said, if you're out on the course, can I just come and listen to what you're telling the builders? Can I learn more? So I really put a lot of time into learning more, even though I'd got my first job. And then I can honestly say, one thing led to another. And I mean, I got Bramham. I did Bramham for 10 years. Mark tasked me with doing Gatcombe one year when he couldn't. I did Thurleston up in Scotland. And then I got Buccleuch. And in the end, I did Buccleuch for 19 years. So in the end, I was quite experienced.
What was the feeling? I was going to say, they all add up, and very different courses as well, I think, a lot of those. What was the moment like? Because, you've ridden at the very highest level on championship teams and badminton and the 5 stars yourself. You've now got a horse competing at that level. You've had those phone calls throughout your career. What was the phone call like to say, will you design the home Olympics course?
Do you know, I can honestly say I didn't believe it. It was like, that this can't be happening. I'd had the interview, but I knew there were other very good designers who'd had the interview as well. And I didn't know how I'd come across in the interview. I'd tried to be really sort of up about imaginative and lots of great new ideas and things, but I honestly didn't feel I was the most experienced designer that was interviewed. And so when I got I think it was a letter actually, and it was meant to be kept secret anyway. So I just sort of tucked the whole bit of news away, and I didn't even tell my husband for probably a week or 10 days, and because it was sort of embargoed. And he'd helped me by walking around Greenwich before the interview for me to get some ideas and things, and he'd walk with me, but I still could. I guess it was the shock of being told, we would like you to design it, and of course I accepted. And then I thought, well, now what?
How far out is that in the build-up? So London's 2012. When would this have taken place?
It was 5 years.
So 2007. So it had been a really, really purple patch as well, with home Europeans in 2005 and Zara obviously taking the individual title and Britain being so dominant in the sport. How do you go about designing an Olympic track in a greenfield site like Greenwich Park, which has never traditionally had a cross-country course? You've got it totally bare bones, so to speak. It's free reign as far as there aren't any ideas already in place, but you've got lots of other things to consider. And an Olympics feels, to me, a little bit like you are partly in charge of the legacy, because not only is it the legacy of what is going to be left and where it is held, but also Olympic photos are so iconic. And you can quite often look at a picture of a horse jumping a cross-country fence, particularly at the Olympics, and know where they are. So how was that? How did that differ to other events like the Bramhams, like the Buccleuchs, or the the time you went to Gatcombe where there was already a course in place? How did that differ, and what were the key things that you needed to incorporate in your Olympics?
I mean, I think looking back, I think I was fairly methodical about it, because the first thing was that I've got to get the distance. And actually, that was a huge problem right from day one, getting the distance without making it twisty, turny, backwards, forwards, up, down, And then right in the very early days, there was ground I was told I could use, which later was withdrawn. So I had to keep changing my plans a little bit. So throughout those 5 years, there was always changes, which were sort of quite challenging at times, but really the distance got me first. I sort of had to get a 10-minute track. And then I wanted to use as much of the park the iconic things that were in the park. There was so much to play with. I mean, I had a dream of jumping them on and off the bandstand at one stage. I thought that would be absolutely terrific. I was very imaginative about what to do, but in the end you have to draw back a bit and be a bit more sensible. And I needed someone to start drawing these fences for me so I could imagine what they would look like. So I did have quite a lot of help with the sort of visuals of what I was trying to design. I wanted it to be different. I wanted it to be memorable. And I can always say people won't forget London Olympics. I think there are fences there that no one will ever forget. And that was very important to me. But quite soon after I was appointed, we then started looking for the builders. And I can honestly say that whatever I did at London Olympics, I couldn't have done it without my builders. I mean, they were unbelievable. And I had 4 of the best builders in the country and they sort of set up a little company just for the Olympics. And, as I say, I designed it, but they're the ones that saw what I was trying to do and actually produced it.
And they were the likes of, I think, Andy Hunter, Adrian Ditcham. Who else was there?
Scotty and Jonathan Clissold.
Okay, so I mean, they are 4 brilliant eventing minds in their own right as well. Massive experience. I think Adrian now actually designs Buccolo. Andy Hunter has got a whole vast amount of experience. Jonathan Clissold, massively involved in the safety aspect of the sport as well. So, I mean, lots of different angles being able to kind of put into the melting pot. How much of it is a collaborative approach? Because ultimately you're the designer, the buck stops with you essentially, but it's a team effort as well.
It was a massive team effort. We had a lot of meetings where we all sat down together and sort of pulled things apart, talked about specific fences. But what was so lovely was that I finally had 35 fences altogether. I finally had the fences on paper, and then they all picked the ones they wanted to build. So they took it in turns, and then it was like, I want to do the horseshoe, I want to do the diamond, I want to do the first water jump. They literally chose their own fences. So in the end, they all had the same number of fences each to build, and they were all done in different workshops. Obviously, they were done. Most of them were portables. Obviously, we weren't allowed to put posts in the ground. We weren't allowed to build anything permanent. We weren't allowed to dig ditches. We weren't. If we changed the contour of the ground in any way, it had to have membranes underneath so that it was all taken back to how it had been originally. So there was a massive amount of work to do just getting the thing going, really. And then we had a sort of budget, and we went way over budget to start with, and were sent straight back to the drawing board. Sorry, no, start again.
If you don't ask, you don't get.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it was huge.
What was it like putting those fences out? Because it's a site that had, you couldn't really make a lot of changes to. These fences have all gone and been made in separate different workshops around the country. So actually bringing it together and kind of seeing it come to life, what was that like?
We were given, I think, 3 weeks, maybe less, from start to finish. So, one of the most exciting moments was seeing all the fences arriving on these massive lorries, all piled up upside down and stacked on their ends. And these huge lorries have sort of rumbled into Greenwich Park and sort of parked up on the avenue. And obviously we had to lift them off and put them down and line them up. And then there was the discussion of which fences should we put in first. And, I sort of pretty much lived up there for those 3 weeks, as obviously did the boys. All I can remember was that it was unbelievably exciting, but very, very pressurized time-wise, we were under a lot of pressure, and we were always having to be careful what we did, where we drove the vehicles. Had we put down matting and stuff so that we didn't damage the ground, and of course preparing the ground, the galloping ground, the actual track. I mean, that was a 3-year job just to get the park fit to gallop on, because we had to reseed, we had to water, we had to fertilize. Then bits of the park we couldn't fence it off, so then bits of the park got damaged, so they had to be reseeded and this and that. Honestly, it was a mission.
What did it bring having the cross country in Greenwich Park? Because that was sort of in the hub of the Olympics, wasn't it? There'd been an argument beforehand as to whether it could go out to the likes of Badminton or Burley or to an established track, and you would host it sort of away from the Olympics. But actually, what was it being part of that games and kind of in the hub as such that made the difference?
I mean, I'm sure from the competitors' point of view, it was absolutely fantastic. The last thing they want to do is compete away from the feel of being in the buzz of things. And because London was so alive and all the talk was so positive of the whole Olympic thing, I think from their point of view, to just be able to sort of step out of their hotels, and they were in London, the horses were stabled on site. And the whole, they had a gallop which would laid up for them up one of what was originally a road. They laid a complete gallop up one of the roads for them to warm up on. I think from a competitor's point of view, it was the absolutely best thing that could have happened. And it brought London alive, and it brought the sport to a lot of people who had never, ever seen a horse. I mean, the test event the year before was absolutely amazing because there weren't obviously any spectators, but all the local schools sent their children out. Now, these kids had never seen a horse, let alone one thundering past them and jumping into the sort of children's pond, which I'd converted into a water jump. And I mean, they were absolutely made up, and I think that sort of thing. And also because the tickets were sold slightly randomly and people got tickets for the cross country and they didn't know what they got. I think it was really, really good for the sport. And it's sad there wasn't a huge legacy, but I think that was always going to be the case. But it was memorable.
I think legacy is, you can look at it from different perspectives, because actually, yes, you could say the investment at another event that we can go back to it and have sport at is great in itself. And there's an argument for both parts. But in my mind, part of this sort of what makes the Olympics so special is that you are part of this big thing. And actually being a part of that, you don't want to be off anywhere else. You want to expose the sport to people that have never seen a horse before. And I think London absolutely did that. The stories of the crowds are extraordinary. It essentially was absolutely jam-packed. And the roar, what was the roar like for you? And how was the nerves on cross country day? Because it was, you say a pressure cooker in the build up too, but ultimately the last 5 years had all been working for you towards this one day.
Definitely. I think I was almost too tired to be nervous. If I'll be absolutely honest, by the time it was finally, the day had arrived, there was nothing more I could do, and I was genuinely exhausted. But I didn't hear the roar. I was too focused on every step that every horse took as to what my fences were doing. Were they doing a job? Was this the sort of course that was needed? Was it working? Was it not working? We had so much pressure to make the picture look great and make sure that the sport came out on top as a wonderful sport. And so you kind of rely on the horses and riders to do a good job, and you pray they will, but then you want your course to be strong enough to get the winner, the correct winner, but not defeat so many of maybe the nations that, had only just qualified and were there just because it was an amazing thing to be part of an Olympic Games. And obviously in any Olympic Games at that level, you get such a range of ability from both the horses and the experience of the riders. So the pressure for me to build a track which brought out the best in the best and didn't defeat the less experienced. Right. I mean, that's the same for every track, but for the Olympics, because suddenly the world was watching, not just equestrian people. Burley badminton, you're basically putting a sport out to the converted. You put the Olympics out and you're putting a sport out to people who'll switch on the telly and go, oh, this looks a bit interesting. I wonder what this is all about. So that was the real pressure. And so for every horse that went through those finishing flags, there was a sigh of relief. But then I'll have to say, when the second horse went inside the time or something, I was like, oh my God, maybe
it's the balance. It is very much the balance of, like you say, testing the best and not defeating the rest. Because ultimately, the Olympics, that's one of the things that is so special about it. And there's plenty of discussion around that. But ultimately, the sport is in the Olympics, and personally, I hope it is in the Olympics for a very, very, very long time to come. I think it makes a massive difference. Nowadays, we see actually a number of those iconic London fences at different events dotted around the country. Does that give you a small thrill?
It just brings back memories, actually. It's nice that the fences went out and were seen. Yeah, I mean, we've moved, what is it, 8, 9, 10 years since whatever it is. Somehow they're not, it doesn't any longer, if any of them still are out there, it doesn't really. It's like that was a different world. That was a different life almost. I've done so much since, but I think it was lovely that the events did buy into those fences, and some of those fences were absolutely fantastic, really fantastic.
It was a work of art. It absolutely was. One question I want to ask you is women in course design, because to my knowledge, you are one of the only, if not the only, woman who's ever designed at the very, very top level of the sport. How can we get more women involved in course design? Because it is a very, very male-dominated industry.
I don't think it should matter whether you're male or female. You should just have the designer desire, if that makes sense. I would have also loved to have been an interior designer in another world. I like shapes, I like design, I like things to fit, I like colours, all that sort of thing. So I think if you're that sort of a person, you could have that desire. But unfortunately, you really, really need to have ridden at top level to try and combine the two and to stop your competitive career at the right time in your life, maybe, is what's difficult for women, because obviously they probably have families. There are so many things that women have to juggle. And I was just lucky to start to want to give up my riding career at a time when I wasn't under a lot of pressure with the family. My boys were growing up fast and at boarding school. My husband had a job which he was away a lot, so I had time on my hands to do the things as I said I did, which was to spend a lot of time learning. And whether women find that very difficult to get the right timing for that. And also, as I say, having to have ridden at a really high level and to understand what they would jump. I mean, when I was eventing, I tried to jump anything that was put in front of me. I didn't really understand why it was in front of me, but I had to solve the problem. I think now riders look more carefully at the fences and the profile of them, and the top line and the ground lines, and it's much more technical now. And so to actually make that move from riding to designing is more difficult. It wasn't that difficult for me. I hadn't got a clue what I was doing, but everyone thought I was wonderful because I'd ridden at top level. Well, now you actually have to ride at top level, but learn from the bottom up. I was lucky I didn't have to go and start in pre-novice and novices. I just was thrown, as I say, Victim was thrown at me, advanced, intermediate, novice, design them all.
And you are right, the sport has very much changed over the last 20 years, 15, 20 years. The sport has changed. It's continually changing. And the challenge of a course designer is one that I certainly don't envy, because there is that real balance of you've got to test the best, but you ultimately, there are so many developments in safety and everything else. You want to make sure everybody comes home safe, and you also getting that balance. It is an absolute tightrope.
And you take the knocks, and there were some massive knocks, obviously, along the way. And I can honestly say, out of all the things I've done, I think the designing was the most difficult. And sticking to it was very difficult, because there were times when I obviously wasn't probably the most popular designer in the world, and got quite a lot of flack from all sides, really. And particularly when I'll be absolutely honest, when I was appointed the job at the Olympics, there was a lot of negative response to that. And that was a big knock for me, because you want to do a good job and you want people to believe in you and you want to believe in yourself. And then there's that moment when you think, well, actually, do I really want to do this and put my head above the parapet? Do I really want to? But I'm not one for giving up.
You're certainly not, and it has been absolutely brilliant to look back on some of those memories with you. I think I will just do a shout out to one up and coming female designer who is coming up through the ranks. She was actually the reserve for London in Lucy McCarthy. So fingers crossed we will see another one.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll see more. Yeah, I'm sure we'll see more. They should be encouraged, because it's all about just understanding the sport and having some imagination and being prepared to always ask. That was the other thing, was that in the beginning you didn't ask. Nowadays you can pull people in and say, I'm worried about this fence. What do you think? Should I give it a bit more distance? Should I change the angle? Everyone wants to help. When I started, it was very much, well, over to you. So I think women must come through, because we can design.
We absolutely can. Come on, girls, we've got this. But no, so seriously, an unbelievable inspiration to, I'm sure, many people who'll be listening to this, thinking one day they would love to be able to explore that kind of avenue. Thank you so much. It has been a pleasure to have you on the show. We've loved hearing more about Falco. And of course, your career as a course designer. I feel like we've not even touched on the riding, but cup of tea shows are traditionally quite sort of short and snappy, listeners. This is an absolute humdinger for you. But
this isn't very short. Sorry, guys.
No, not at all. I could keep asking the questions. But Sue, thank you so much. It has been a pleasure to have you on the show. Listeners, we hope you've enjoyed it. I certainly have absolutely loved this one.